Lupra Botolph had been told her entire life that she was a mistake, until the most desired alpha said her name aloud, and the world her stepmother built began to crumble. But how can someone who's been silenced for so long learn to howl? And what is the price of remembering you were never meant to disappear? Hello, lovely. If you're drawn to tales of forbidden power, wolves who refuse to bow, and love that shatters every lie, I'd be so grateful for a like or subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories of alphas, outcasts, and the magic that binds them. And if you're up for it, tell me in the comments, have you ever felt invisible in a room full of people? I read every word, and your stories feel mine. In the forbidden stretch of forest beyond the Botolph estate walls, where silver birch trees twisted toward a moon that never seemed to offer mercy, Lupra Botolph crouched in the snow and tried to shift. Her hands trembled, human and fragile, as she pressed them into the frozen earth. Her breath came in clouds of white mist, her heart hammering against her ribs like something caged. The moon was full tonight, fat and luminous, and she could feel the pull of it in her blood. The call to transform, the instinct every wolf in the territory answered without thought. But for Lupra, shifting was forbidden. She closed her eyes and reached inward, searching for the wolf that lived beneath her skin. For a moment, just a breath, she felt it stir. A flicker of silver light, a whisper of freedom. Then the transformation took hold, painful and incomplete, and she gasped as her body began to change. Her wolf form was small, too small. A pale, silver creature with uncertain paws and a coat that shimmered weakly in the moonlight. Not the powerful, dominant wolf of an alpha bloodline. Not the kind of wolf that commanded respect. This is what happens. Her stepmother's voice echoed in her memory when bad blood tries to wear a noble name. But for just this moment, alone in the woods, Lupra let herself run. The snow crunched beneath her paws. The wind carried scents she could never detect as a human: pine, frost, the distant musk of deer. She felt her muscles stretch, her lungs expand, her heart beat in rhythm with the forest itself. For 30 perfect seconds, she was free. Then she heard the voice that turned her blood to ice. "What do you think you're doing?" Lupra's wolf froze mid-stride. She spun, her smaller form trembling, to see Lady Shinori standing at the edge of the tree line. At 43, her stepmother was a striking figure even in fury. Tall, severe, with dark hair pulled back in an unforgiving twist, and eyes like chips of black ice. She wore a heavy fur-lined cloak over her evening gown, and in her gloved hand she held a coil of silver chain. Silver, the one metal that burned wolfkind, the one thing that could force a shift back to human form. Lupra tried to speak, but her wolf's voice came out as a pathetic whine. "Shift! Now!" Shinori's command cracked through the air like a whip. Lupra's body obeyed before her mind could. The transformation reversed violently, painfully, and within seconds she was kneeling naked in the snow, her thin frame shaking from cold and fear. She wrapped her arms around herself, unable to meet her stepmother's gaze. Shinori's approached with slow, deliberate steps, her boots crunching over the frozen ground. She stopped directly in front of Lupra and let the silver chain uncoil, the links clinking together in the silence. "How many times must I teach you this lesson?" Shinori's voice was soft now, which somehow made it worse. "You are not like the others, Lupra. You are not a true wolf. You are a half-blood mistake, and every time you try to pretend otherwise, you shame the Botolph name." "I'm sorry," Lupra whispered. The words were automatic. She had said them 1,000 times. "You will be." Shinori's looped the silver chain around Lupra's wrists. The metal touched her skin, and she bit back a scream as it seared her flesh. The smell of burning skin rose into the night air. "Stand up." Lupra obeyed, stumbling to her feet. Shinori's yanked the chain, forcing her forward, and began to drag her back through the forest toward the estate. Every step was agony. The silver burned deeper, the cold bit harder, and the humiliation settled over her like a shroud. At 19, Lupra Botolph had perfected the art of disappearing. She could move through the manor without making a sound, speak without being heard, exist without taking up space. Lady Shinori's had taught her well. "You are a stain on this bloodline. You have no wolf worth claiming. You are a burden we bear because your father's foolish heart bound us to you." The words had been repeated in so many variations, in so many cold corridors and locked rooms that they had become the architecture of Lupra's identity. It was easier to believe what she was told, that her wolf was wrong, her blood tainted, her very existence an offense, than to hope for anything different. Her hair was dark, almost black, and fell in wild curls she could never quite tame. Her eyes were an unusual shade of amber green, ringed in gold, eyes that might have been beautiful if they didn't carry the haunted look of someone who had learned to expect cruelty. Her frame was delicate, always had been, but there was a quiet, unbroken thing inside her that refused to be entirely snuffed out. The forest itself had become her only sanctuary. Once, when her father was still alive, he had walked these woods with her, taught her the names of the trees, shown her how to read the stars, but he had died 3 years ago under circumstances her stepmother refused to discuss, and everything had changed. Lady Shinori's never came to the woods, couldn't bear to, and that made them Lupra's, one small corner of the world where she could still remember who she used to be before the chains, before the silence, before she learned that hoping was dangerous. She had been adding one final touch to her shift, trying to feel her wolf's heartbeat sync with her own, when Shinori's found her. Now, as she was dragged barefoot through the snow, the silver burning her wrists raw, Lupra felt that fragile hope shatter like ice. They entered the manor through the servants' entrance. Shinori's grip on the chain never loosened. The kitchen staff turned away as they passed. No one would help. No one ever did. "Take her to the courtyard," Shinori's commanded 2 guards waiting by the fire. "Chain her in the center. I want everyone to see what happens when defective blood tries to rise above its station." Lupra's vision blurred. Not from tears. She had learned long ago that tears only made it worse, but from the sheer weight of it. The shame. The pain. The knowledge that tomorrow, when the entire household woke, they would see her chained like an animal. The guards took her arms. The silver burned. The walk across the stone courtyard felt endless, and as they locked the chain to the iron post in the center of the yard, as the moon watched in silence above, Lupra closed her eyes and made herself a promise. "I will not cry. I will not break. I will survive this." But she didn't let herself hope. Not yet. Not until the day, 3 weeks later, when the most desired alpha in all the territories rode through the Botolph gates, and everything she had been taught began to unravel. Chapter 2. The Alpha King arrives. The Botolph estate had not seen this much activity in years. Lupra watched from the shadows of the upper corridor as servants swarmed through the great hall below, their arms laden with winter roses, silk banners, and candelabras that hadn't been polished since her father's funeral. The annual Blood Alliance gathering was 3 days away, and Lady Shinori's was determined that the Botolph manor would outshine every other house in the Northern Territories. More importantly, she was determined that her daughter, Lupra's half-sister, Nixiera, would catch the eye of the most powerful alpha attending. Mora Nixiera, the Alpha King. Even his name seemed to shift the air when spoken aloud. Lupra knelt on the cold stone floor, scrubbing at a stain that had likely been there since before she was born. Her wrists still bore the silver burns from 3 weeks ago, pink, puckered scars that ached when the weather turned cold. She wore long sleeves now, always. Another lesson learned. Stay invisible. Stay silent. Survive. But it was hard to stay invisible when the entire household hummed with anticipation. "I heard he's only 25, one of the kitchen maids whispered as she passed, arms full of linens. "Youngest Alpha King in 3 centuries. "I heard he killed the previous king in single combat," another replied, voice hushed with awe and fear. "Tore his throat out in front of the entire council. They say his wolf is black as midnight and twice the size of any alpha born." And unmarked, the first mate added meaningfully, "No mate, no bond. Every noble house with a daughter is scheming." They disappeared down the stairs, but their voices echoed back. "Lady Shinori's thinks Nixiera has a chance. She's been preparing her for months." Lupra's hand stilled on the brush. Nixiera, her half-sister, the legitimate daughter, the one with the proper bloodline, the proper wolf, the proper everything. They had been raised in the same house but lived in different worlds. Nixiera had tutors, gowns, and dance lessons. Lupra had chores, silence, and bruises that didn't show. On the rare occasions they passed each other in the hallways, Nixiera looked through her as if she were made of glass. Maybe she was. A sharp voice cut through her thoughts. Lupera! The housekeeper, Mrs. Thorne, appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pinched with irritation. Stop dawdling. The eastern wing needs to be prepared. Lord Mora's entourage arrives within the hour, and if a single detail is amiss, Lady Shinoris will have both our hides. Yes, ma'am. Lupera rose, quickly, gathering her bucket and brushes. Her knees protested. She'd been kneeling for 2 hours. And for heaven's sake, keep to the servants' corridors, Mrs. Thorne added, her tone softening just slightly. We can't have you visible. Not during the gathering. You understand. Of course she understood. She was the shameful secret. The stain. The half-blood mistake that needed to be hidden when important guests arrived. Lupera nodded and slipped toward the back stairs, her footsteps silent as breath. She was cleaning the high windows of the eastern corridor when she first felt it. A change in the air, a shift in pressure, like the moment before lightning struck. Her wolf, the small, uncertain thing that lived beneath her ribs, stirred. Not in fear this time, but in recognition. As if something it had been waiting for its entire life was finally, impossibly near. Lupera's hand froze on the window pane. Below, in the courtyard, she heard the sound of hoofbeats. Heavy, rhythmic, accompanied by the jingle of silver tack and the low murmur of male voices. Her heart began to pound. She shouldn't look. She was supposed to be invisible. But something deeper than obedience, something primal and undeniable, pulled her to the edge of the balcony. From her vantage point, hidden behind a stone column, Lupera looked down. The Alpha King's entourage had arrived. There were perhaps a dozen wolves in human form, all of them tall, broad-shouldered, and radiating the kind of power that made ordinary men step aside. They wore dark traveling cloaks lined with fur, and each bore the silver crest of the Mora bloodline, a wolf's head crowned in thorns. But it was the figure at the center that made Lupera's breath catch. Mora Nixiera, dismounted from a black warhorse with the fluid grace of a predator. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that spoke of both violence and control. His hair was dark, almost black, and fell just past his collar in waves that looked perpetually windswept. His jaw was sharp, his features carved from something harder than stone, and even from this distance, Lupera could see the intensity in his eyes. Silver. His eyes were silver, like moonlight on ice. He moved with the absolute confidence of someone who had never needed to make himself smaller, who had never learned to disappear. And then, God's help her, he looked up. Their eyes met. The world stopped. Lupera felt it like a physical blow, a jolt of electricity that started in her chest and radiated outward until her fingertips tingled and her wolf howled inside her. Not in fear, not in submission, in greeting. Her wolf recognized him, knew him, wanted him with an intensity that terrified her. Mora's silver eyes widened, just fractionally. His entire body went still, alert, like a predator catching an unexpected scent on the wind. His nostrils flared. For 3 heartbeats, they stared at each other across the distance. Lupera couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't look away. His lips parted, as if he might speak. Lord Mora, welcome to the Botolph estate. Lady Shinoris's voice shattered the moment like glass. Lupera jerked backward, pressing herself against the wall, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. What was she thinking? Staring at the Alpha King like some foolish girl. Below, Shinori swept into the courtyard in a gown of deep emerald, Nixiera beside her in pale gold. Both of them were radiant, powerful, perfect. Everything Lupera could never be. The honor is ours, Shinori's continued, her voice warm and welcoming in a way it never was within these walls. Please, allow me to introduce my daughter, Nixiera Botolph. Nixiera curtsied with practiced grace, her blonde hair catching the afternoon light. She was beautiful, everyone said so. Tall, elegant, with the kind of wolfish features that spoke of pure bloodlines. Mora inclined his head politely. Lady Shinoris, Lady Nixiera. But his eyes, those devastating silver eyes, flicked upward again. Searching. Lupera's blood turned to ice. He was looking for her. Your hospitality is appreciated, Mora said, his voice deep and measured. The journey was long. Then you must be eager to rest, Shinoris replied smoothly. We've prepared the finest chambers for you and your men. The gathering begins in 3 days, but tonight we thought a quiet dinner, just our family and your inner circle." "Actually," Mora interrupted, his gaze still scanning the upper windows, "I caught an unusual scent as I arrived. Unfamiliar." Shinori's smile didn't waver, but Lupra saw her spine stiffen. "I'm sure it was merely the winter roses, my lord. We've had them brought in from—" "No." Mora's tone was polite but absolute. "Not flowers. A wolf. Unmated. Close by." The silence that followed was suffocating. Lupra's hands trembled. She pressed herself harder against the wall, praying to every god she didn't believe in that he would let it go, that Shinori's would deflect, that this moment would pass. Shinori's laughed lightly, a practiced sound. "You must be mistaken, Lord Mora. The only unmated wolf of noble blood here is my daughter, and she stands before you." Mora's eyes finally left the upper windows and returned to Shinori's. Something in his expression shifted, closed off, unreadable. "Of course," he said quietly. "Forgive me." But Lupra saw the way his jaw tightened. He didn't believe her. That night, as Lupra lay on her narrow cot in the servants' quarters, she stared at the ceiling and tried to calm the wild beating of her heart. He had looked at her. The most powerful alpha in the territories had looked at her, and something inside her had answered. It was dangerous. It was impossible. It was the kind of foolish hope that would only bring pain. And yet, she closed her eyes and saw silver irises staring back. 2 floors below, in the finest guest chamber, Mora Nixiera stood at the window and gazed out at the moonlit forest. His wolf was restless, agitated. It had caught a scent in the courtyard, wild, untamed, powerful, and then watched that scent disappear like smoke. Someone was lying to him. And Mora Nixiera had built an empire by knowing when he was being lied to. He would find the source of that scent. He would find her, even if it meant tearing this entire manor apart stone by stone. Chapter 3: The Banquet of Shadows. The great hall of the Botalf estate had been transformed. Hundreds of candles blazed in the iron chandeliers overhead, casting dancing shadows across walls hung with ancestral tapestries. The long table groaned under the weight of roasted venison, honeyed pheasant, winter vegetables glazed in butter, and wine from the Botalf cellars that hadn't been opened since Lupra's father was alive. 20 of the most powerful alphas in the northern territories sat along that table, their wolves barely contained beneath their human skin. The air thrummed with dominance, with territorial tension, with the constant subtle dance of power that defined wolf society. And Lupra stood in the shadows behind a stone column, dressed in a servant's gray wool, holding a pitcher of wine she'd been ordered to pour. "You will serve tonight," Lady Shinori's had told her that morning, her voice sharp as a blade. "You will keep your eyes down, your mouth shut, and your presence unnoticed. If you embarrass me in front of Lord Mora, I will ensure you regret every breath you take afterward. Do you understand?" Lupra had understood perfectly. This was a test, a humiliation disguised as obedience. Shinori's wanted to parade her before the Alpha King as a servant, proof that the scent he detected was nothing more than a half-blood mistake, unworthy of attention. Stay invisible. Stay silent. Survive. She repeated the mantra as she watched Mrs. Thorne give the signal. 3 other servant girls began moving through the room, filling glasses, offering bread. Lupra would serve the head of the table, where Mora Nixiera sat. Her hands trembled as she lifted the heavy pitcher. The wine inside, a deep red vintage, sloshed dangerously close to the rim. She could do this. She had spent 19 years learning to be nothing. One more night wouldn't break her. Taking a breath that did nothing to steady her nerves, Lupra stepped out of the shadows. The conversations around the table were loud, boisterous. Alphas boasting about territory expansions, hunting successes, political maneuvering. At the center of it all, Lady Shinori's held court like a queen, with Nixiera seated at her right in a gown of ice-blue silk that made her look like winter personified. And at Shinori's left sat Mora. He wore black tonight, a fitted jacket that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, simple but unmistakably expensive. His dark hair was tied back loosely, revealing the sharp angles of his face. Those silver eyes watched the room with an intensity that suggested he saw everything, missed nothing, forgot even less. Lupra approached from behind, as she'd been taught. silent, unobtrusive. She reached for the first glass, Shinori's, and began to pour. Her stepmother didn't even glance at her. To acknowledge Lupura's existence in front of guests would be to admit she existed at all. Lupura moved to the next seat, then the next, and then she stood behind Mora Nixiera. The moment she came within 3 feet of him, everything changed. She felt it first, a sudden spike in the temperature of the room, a charge in the air like the moment before a storm broke. The wine pitcher grew heavy in her hands. Mora had gone completely still. Every muscle in his body tensed. His fingers tightened around the stem of his wine glass with enough force that Lupura heard it crack. Around them, conversations began to falter as other alphas sensed the shift in energy. Lupura's wolf surged beneath her skin, responding to whatever was happening inside him. Her breath caught. The pitcher trembled. Just pour the wine. Don't look at him. Don't. She leaned forward, reaching for his glass. Mora inhaled. It was a sharp, sudden sound, and then he moved. He stood so abruptly that his chair scraped backward across the stone floor with a screech that silenced the entire hall. The cracked wine glass shattered in his grip, red wine and blood mingling as shards fell to the table. 20 pairs of eyes turned to stare. Lupura stumbled backward, the pitcher slipping from her hands. It hit the floor with a crash, wine spreading across the stones like spilled blood. What? Shinori's began, half rising from her seat. But Mora wasn't looking at her. He was staring at Lupura with an expression that she couldn't name. Shock, recognition, something fierce and primal and utterly undeniable. His chest rose and felt like he'd been running. His silver eyes had darkened to the color of storm clouds. And when he spoke, his voice was rough, scraped raw. Lupura! The name echoed through the hall like a thunderclap. Lupura felt the world tilt. No one had spoken her name aloud in years, not since her father died. It had become forbidden, erased, a thing only whispered in cruelty or not spoken at all. But Mora said it like a vow, like a claim. The hall had gone completely silent. Lupura's voice came out as barely a whisper. She couldn't move, couldn't think, could only stare at this powerful alpha who looked at her like she was the only person in the room. How do you know her name? Shinori's voice cut through the moment, cold and sharp. She was standing now, her composure cracking at the edges. She's merely a servant, Lord Mora. Don't. Mora's command was soft but absolute. He still hadn't looked away from Lupura. Don't lie to me. Around the table, the other alphas exchanged glances. Tension rippled through the room like a living thing. Shinori's face had gone pale, then flushed with barely controlled rage. My lord, I assure you, there's been some misunderstanding. This girl is nobody. A bastard child my late husband took in out of misguided charity. An error in judgment that... An error! Mora finally turned to face Shinori's, and his expression made several of the lesser alphas lean back in their seats. Is that what you call her? She has no proper bloodline, Shinori's continued, her voice gaining strength as she fell back on familiar lies. No standing. Her mother was a common. Her sense is otherwise. The words hung in the air. Lupura saw Shinori's throat work as she swallowed. Beside her, Nixiera had gone very still, her perfect face carefully blank. Scent can be deceiving, Shinori said, but her voice had lost its certainty. Not to me. Mora's tone was quiet now, conversational, which somehow made it more dangerous. I've spent 15 years learning to read bloodlines by scent alone. It's how I've survived, how I've conquered, how I've built alliances and destroyed enemies. He looked back at Lupura, who stood frozen in the spreading pool of wine, her servant's dress stained red, her face pale with shock. And her scent, Mora continued, his silver eyes never leaving hers, is not that of a servant, not that of a bastard, not even that of an Omega. Then what? One of the other alphas began. Alpha! Mora's word was a stone dropped into still water. She smells of alpha blood, old blood, pure blood. The hall erupted. Voices rose in shock, disbelief, questions hurled at Shinori's, who stood rigid with fury. Nixiera's mask finally cracked, her eyes widening in something that looked like fear. But Lupura heard none of it, because Mora had taken a step toward her, moving around the table with predatory grace. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to disappear as she'd been taught. But her wolf wouldn't let her. It rose inside her, stronger than it had ever been, and howled in recognition. Mora stopped an arm's length away. Up close, he was overwhelming. Tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, broad enough to block out the rest of the room. He smelled of winter wind and wild places, of power held in careful control. "How long?" he asked softly, for her ears alone. Lupura's throat was dry. "How long what? How long have they been poisoning you?" The question hit her like a physical blow. I'm not. Your wolf is suppressed." His voice was gentle now, almost tender. "I can feel it struggling beneath whatever they've been feeding you. Herbs, probably. Maybe something in your food." Tears burned at the back of Lupura's eyes. She shook her head, not in denial but in confusion. "I don't understand what's happening." "I know." Mora's hand lifted, slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he brushed his fingers against her cheek, so gently it made her chest ache. "But you will. Lord Mora." Shinori's voice was ice wrapped in silk. "I must insist you unhand her. Whatever you think you've detected, I assure you there's a perfectly reasonable—" "Then your error," Mora said without turning around, his eyes still locked on Lupura's face. "Smells of royalty." The hall went silent again. Shinori's made a sound low in her throat, rage, fear, the sound of carefully built lies beginning to crumble. Mora smiled, just slightly, though there was nothing kind in it. "In fact, Lady Shinori's, I'm beginning to think your error is the most valuable thing in this entire hall." His thumb traced the line of Lupura's jaw, and she felt her wolf surge in response, felt power she didn't know she possessed rise to meet his touch. "And I don't share," Mora added quietly. Around the table, the other alphas had begun to murmur. Questioning, speculating. Shinori's perfect facade was fracturing with every passing second. Lupura saw her stepmother's hands tremble as they gripped the edge of the table. Saw the fury, white-hot and barely leashed, burning in her eyes. When Shinori spoke again, her voice was very, very soft. "Get out!" Lupura flinched. But Mora didn't move. "Are you speaking to me, Lady Shinori's? Because I don't take orders in another alpha's territory." "She is not!" Shinori's voice cracked. She stopped, visibly fighting for control. When she continued, each word was careful, measured. "She is not an alpha. She is nothing. And I will thank you not to make a spectacle of my household's charity." "Charity?" Mora's laugh was soft and utterly without humor. "Is that what you call it?" He finally turned away from Lupura, though his hand remained at her back. A silent claim, a promise of protection. "I think, Lady Shinori's," he said, his voice carrying through the hall, "that we should continue this conversation in private, along with whatever records you have of Lupura's parentage." "There are no records." Then we'll start with the graves." The color drained from Shinori's face. Mora's smile was all teeth. "I find the dead are far more honest than the living." He looked down at Lupura one more time, and in his silver eyes she saw something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "I see you," that look said, "and I will not let you disappear." Then he addressed the room at large, his voice ringing with authority. "This banquet is over. Lady Shinori's and I have business to discuss. The rest of you enjoy the wine." And with that, he strode toward the door, leaving chaos in his wake. Lupura stood in the ruins of the evening, surrounded by spilled wine and shattered glass and the smoking remains of her stepmother's control, and finally let herself hope. Chapter 4. The Hidden Room. Lupura woke in darkness, uncertain whether the banquet had been real or fevered dream. Her small room in the servants' quarters felt suffocating after the enormity of what had happened in the great hall. She pressed her fingers to her cheeks, half expecting them to still burn with the heat of Mora's gaze, the weight of his words. "Then your error smells of royalty." Outside her locked door, she could hear the whispers. "Enchanted him somehow. Dark magic has to be." Saw the way he looked at her, like she was. Lady Shinori's is furious, absolutely. Lupura pulled the thin blanket over her head, trying to block out the voices. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw silver irises staring into her soul, felt the phantom touch of fingers against her jaw. What was happening to her? 3 floors below, in the Botolph library, Mora Nixiera stood alone among the shadows. He shouldn't be here. It was well past midnight, and prowling through another alpha's private collection uninvited was a breach of protocol that could spark a territorial dispute. But Mora had built his reputation on knowing when to follow rules and when to break them. His wolf was restless, pacing beneath his skin with an agitation that bordered on madness. It wanted to find the girl, Lupera, and drag her somewhere safe. Somewhere far from the cold-eyed woman who called herself her stepmother. Because Shinori's was lying. Every instinct Mora possessed screamed it. The scent didn't lie. The way every wolf in his entourage had reacted when Lupera passed didn't lie. The silver burns on her wrists, glimpsed so briefly before she'd pulled away, those didn't lie either. Someone had been torturing her, suppressing her, hiding her. The question was why. Mora moved between the shelves, his fingers trailing over leather spines. Family histories, bloodline records, territory maps, all carefully organized, all meticulously maintained. Too carefully. His eyes narrowed as he studied the room. In his experience, when someone kept their public records this pristine, it meant the real secrets were hidden elsewhere. He began searching in earnest. Behind books, under furniture, along the baseboards. His wolf guided him, drawn by instinct to a section of floor near the cold hearth that sounded hollow when he stepped on it. Mora knelt, running his hands over the stones. There, a crack that shouldn't exist. A seam barely visible in the firelight. He pressed, and a section of the floor shifted. Beneath was a small vault, sealed with a lock that had long since rusted. One sharp blow from his fist shattered it. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were the fragments of a life erased. A woman's shawl in midnight blue, embroidered with silver wolves. A child's painting of a forest beneath the moon, signed in careful letters. Lupera, age 7. An alpha's crest he didn't recognize. Ancient, powerful, showing a wolf crowned in moonlight. And beneath it all, a bundle of letters tied with black ribbon. Mora's hands trembled as he unfolded the first one. To whomever finds this, my name is Aldrich Botolph, and if you are reading this, I am likely dead. I write this in secret, in fear, because I have come to believe my wife means to destroy everything I hold dear. My daughter, Lupera, is the legitimate heir to the Botolph bloodline. Born of my sacred mate bond with Alara of the Moonborn line, she carries alpha blood older and purer than any in the Northern Territories. Shinori's knows this. It is why she killed Alara, why she has begun poisoning my food, why she will come for Lupera next. If I do not survive to protect my daughter, I beg whoever finds this, help her remember who she is. Help her break free from whatever cage Shinori's will surely build. She is meant to lead. She is meant to be alpha. Do not let them convince her she is anything less. The letter was dated 3 years ago. Mora read through the rest. Desperate pleas, hidden evidence, instructions for allies who had clearly never received them. A father's last attempt to save his daughter from beyond the grave. His wolf snarled, rage flooding hot through his veins. They had known. Shinori's had known exactly what Lupera was, and had spent years systematically destroying her. Poisoning her wolf, breaking her spirit, making her believe she was worthless so she would never claim what was rightfully hers. Mora carefully folded the letters and placed them inside his jacket. Then he replaced everything else and sealed the vault. He had what he needed. Now he needed to see her. Lupera was drifting in that strange space between waking and sleep when the dream took hold. She stood in a forest bathed in golden moonlight. Before her, pacing with predatory grace, was a wolf unlike any she'd seen. It was enormous, easily twice the size of a normal alpha wolf. Its coat was pure silver white, shimmering as if woven from starlight. And its eyes were molten gold, burning with power that made the air itself tremble. "Who are you?" Lupera whispered. The wolf stopped pacing and turned to face her fully. "You know who I am." A voice echoed. Female, strong, familiar in a way that made Lupera's chest ache. "I am what they tried to bury, what they tried to break." The wolf stepped closer, and Lupera could feel the heat radiating from it. The power. "I am you," the wolf said. "The real you. The one you've forgotten." "I'm not." Lupera shook her head. "I'm nothing. I'm. You are Alpha." The word exploded through the dream like thunder. The golden wolf's eyes blazed brighter, and Lupra felt something crack open inside her chest. She woke with a gasp. Someone was in her room. Easy. Mora's voice came from the shadows. It's me. Lupra's heart hammered as her eyes adjusted to the darkness. He stood by the window, moonlight outlining his silhouette. How did you? The door was locked. I'm an Alpha King. His smile was barely visible. Locks are suggestions. He crossed to her, moving with that fluid grace that made her wolf stir restlessly. When he knelt beside her narrow bed, his silver eyes caught the moonlight. Give me your hands, he said softly. Lupra hesitated, then extended her arms. The sleeves of her nightdress fell back, revealing the silver burns on her wrists, still pink and raw. Mora's expression darkened. His fingers traced the scars with infinite gentleness. How long? His voice was rough. Years, Lupra whispered. Since I was a child, she said it was to teach me control. That my wolf was dangerous. Wrong. Your wolf isn't wrong. Mora's grip tightened on her wrists. It's been caged. The moment he spoke the word, something inside Lupra surged. Power flooded through her veins, the same golden fire from her dream. Her eyes widened as energy built beneath her skin. Too much. Too fast. She collapsed forward, and Mora caught her. His arms wrapped around her as the power crested, as her wolf clawed toward the surface, as 19 years of suppression tried to break free all at once. Breathe, Mora murmured against her hair. I've got you. Let it come. Lupra shook in his embrace as the bond between them, that strange, undeniable connection, flared to life. She could feel his wolf calling to hers, steadying it, showing it how to be strong. What's happening to me? She gasped. You're waking up, Mora said simply, and held her while the cage finally began to shatter. Chapter 5, The Feast of Cruelty. Lady Shinoris had called for a second banquet. Not a private dinner this time, but a grand affair. Every major Alpha family in the Northern Territory summoned to witness what she called a clarification of recent misunderstandings. Lupra knew better. This was war. She stood in the servants' preparation room, watching through the doorway as the great hall filled with wolves. The Thornleaf Pack, the Silvercrest clan, the Iron Ridge bloodline, Alphas whose names carried weight across 3 kingdoms, all gathered under the Botalf banner. All gathered to watch Lupra be destroyed. Drink this. Mrs. Thorne pressed a cup into Lupra's trembling hands. Lady Shinoris' orders. Says it'll steady your nerves. The liquid inside was dark, herbal. It smelled of valerian root and something else, something bitter that made Lupra's wolf recoil. I don't need. It's not a request, girl. Mrs. Thorne's voice softened apologetically. Please, don't make tonight harder than it needs to be. Lupra looked down at the cup. She'd spent the last 2 days locked in her room while Shinoris and Mora had their private discussions. She didn't know what had been said, what evidence Mora had presented, or why he hadn't come to see her. She only knew that Shinoris had emerged from those meetings with a smile like shattered glass, and a plan that terrified the entire household staff. One more night. Just survive one more night. Lupra lifted the cup and drank. The liquid burned going down, leaving a metallic taste on her tongue. Her stomach rolled, but she forced herself to keep it down. Good girl, Mrs. Thorne murmured. Now you'll serve the high table. Keep your head down, pour the wine, and don't speak unless spoken to. Understand? Lupra nodded, though her vision had already begun to blur at the edges. The hall was blazing with light. Every chandelier burned at full brilliance. Every torch was lit, as if Shinoris wanted to ensure nothing could hide in shadows tonight. The long tables were packed with alphas in their formal dress, dark suits and ancestral furs, silver jewelry that marked their bloodlines. And at the head of it all sat Lady Shinoris in midnight velvet, Nixiera beside her in white, and Mora Nixiera in black, positioned between them like a prize they both sought to claim. His silver eyes found Lupra the moment she entered the hall. She saw his expression shift, concern, then something sharper. His nostrils flared as if scenting the air, and his jaw tightened. But he didn't speak, didn't move, because Shinoris was already rising, lifting her wineglass high. My honored guests, she announced, her voice carrying through the hall. Thank you for joining us on such short notice. Recent events have caused confusion regarding my household. Tonight, I wish to clarify matters once and for all. Every eye in the room turned to her. Shinori's smile was serene. There have been suggestions that a member of my household carries alpha blood. That my late husband's indiscretion might be more than we believed. Lupera felt the weight of every gaze shift to her as she stood frozen with her wine pitcher. Her hands had begun to shake. Not from fear, from something else. Something building beneath her skin. I assure you, Shinori's continued, this is merely superstition. The girl is touched, you see. Unstable. The result of tainted bloodlines. The herbal drink churned in Lupera's stomach. Heat spread through her chest like wildfire. In fact, Shinori said, her voice dropping with false sympathy, I fear she may be having one of her episodes even now. Look at her. Lupera's vision swam. She could feel it now, not sedation as Shinori's intended, but something breaking open inside her. Something that had been locked away, suppressed, poisoned into silence for 19 years. And whatever was in that drink had just torn the lock apart. She's unwell, Shinori's was saying. Prone to delusions. Fits. My late husband indulged her, but... The wine pitcher shattered in Lupera's hands. She didn't drop it. It simply exploded, glass and red wine erupting in a spray that made the nearest alphas jerk backward. Lupera gasped as power surged through her veins. Hot, golden, massive. It felt like her bones were reshaping, like something enormous was trying to break free from a cage that had grown too small. You see, Shinori's voice rose triumphantly. She cannot even control. The nearest chandelier began to shake. Silence fell like a blade. Lupera looked up, and even through her blurring vision, she could see it, the iron fixture swaying as if caught in an earthquake. Candles flickered wildly. Around the room, wine glasses began to crack, their stems fracturing with soft musical sounds. What? Someone whispered. The power inside Lupera crested like a wave, and she couldn't hold it back anymore. Didn't want to. For 19 years, she'd been taught to be small, silent, invisible. She was done. Her eyes snapped open, and they were burning gold. The gasp that went through the hall was audible. Alphas half rose from their seats, their wolves reacting to what they sensed. What they recognized. Lupera's aura flooded the room like a tidal wave. It was massive, ancient, overwhelming, the suppressed power of generations finally unleashed. It pressed against every wolf present with an authority that could not be denied, could not be questioned. One by one, the alphas lowered their eyes. Not in fear, in instinctive, undeniable submission. Even the most powerful wolves in the room, clan leaders and territory lords, found themselves unable to meet her gaze. Their heads bowed as their wolves recognized what stood before them. Not a servant, not a bastard, not a mistake. An alpha, pure-blooded, powerful, dominant. Impossible, Shinori's whispered, her face drained of color. But Mora was already moving. He crossed the hall in 3 strides and positioned himself at Lupera's side. Unlike every other wolf in the room, he didn't lower his gaze. He met her burning eyes with his silver ones, and she saw nothing but fierce satisfaction. She is not cursed, Mora declared, his voice ringing through the silent hall. He took Lupera's bleeding hand in his, heedless of the glass shards. She is not mad. She is not a mistake. He turned to face the assembled alphas, and his smile was sharp as a blade. She is mine. The hall erupted. Voices rose in shock. Awe, questions hurled at Shinori's who swayed in her seat like she'd been struck. Nixiera had gone white as her dress, her perfect composure shattered. But Lupera heard none of it, because the word echoed in her mind, impossibly loud mine. Her power was still flooding the room, still pressing against every wolf present, but she managed to turn her head, to look at Mora through eyes that blazed with golden fire. Mine, she whispered, her voice raw. Mora's hand tightened on hers. He leaned close, and amidst the chaos, spoke soft enough for only her to hear. You always were. And as the chandelier above them finally shattered, raining crystal across the hall like stars, Lupera felt something inside her chest crack open. Not breaking. Blooming. Chapter 6, The Sister's Confession. The aftermath of the Feast of Cruelty left the Botalf estate in chaos. Lupera had been taken to a guest chamber, not her servants' quarters, but a real room with a canopied bed and windows that overlooked the forest. Mora had in fact, stationed 2 of his own guards outside her door with orders that no one from the Botolph household was to enter without his permission. She sat on the edge of the bed now, staring at her bandaged hands. The healer had removed the glass shards and wrapped her palms in clean linen, but she could still feel the echo of what had happened in the hall. The power that had torn through her. The golden fire in her eyes. The way every alpha in the room had bowed. "She is mine." Lupera touched her chest, where something warm and unfamiliar had taken root. A bond. She didn't fully understand it, but she could feel Mora now, sense his presence somewhere in the manor, a steady pulse of strength that anchored her when everything else felt like it was dissolving. A soft knock at the door made her flinch. "Lady Lupera!" One of Mora's guards spoke through the wood. "You have a visitor. Your sister. She says it's urgent." Lupera's breath caught. "Nixiera!" "Yes, my lady. Should I send her away?" Every instinct screamed yes. Nixiera was Shinori's daughter, her perfect golden child. They'd lived in the same house for years, and Nixiera had watched Lupera suffer without ever speaking a word in her defense. But something in the guard's tone suggested this wasn't a hostile visit. "Let her in," Lupera said quietly. The door opened, and Nixiera stepped through. Lupera barely recognized her. The composed, elegant daughter of House Botolph was gone. Nixiera's blonde hair hung loose and disheveled around her shoulders. Her ice blue gown was rumpled, as if she'd been pacing for hours, and her eyes, usually so carefully blank, were red-rimmed and desperate. She looked, for the first time Lupera could remember, human. "I need to speak with you," Nixiera said, her voice hoarse. "Please." Lupera gestured to the chair across from her, wary. "Speak, then." Nixiera didn't sit. Instead, she crossed to the window and stood with her back to Lupera, her shoulders rigid with tension. "I've been a coward," she said finally. "My entire life I've been a coward." Lupera said nothing. Waited. "I knew." Nixiera's voice cracked. "God's help me, Lupera! I knew what she was doing to you." The words hung in the air like smoke. "The suppressants in your food," Nixiera continued, her hands clenching the windowsill. "The lies about your bloodline. The way she isolated you, humiliated you, made you believe you were nothing. I knew all of it." Lupera's throat tightened. "Then why didn't you stop her?" "Because I was afraid." Nixiera spun around, and tears streaked her face. "I was afraid she would turn on me the way she turned on you. That if I spoke up, if I showed even a hint of defiance, I'd end up in chains too. So you chose silence." Lupera's voice was flat. "You chose safety while I know." Nixiera's shoulders shook. "I know what I am. I know what I've done. But I'm here now because you deserve the truth. All of it." She reached into her bodice and pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. Her hands trembled as she held it out. "Your father's letters. The ones Mother hid after he died." Lupera stared at the envelope as if it might burn her. "What do they say?" "That you're his legitimate heir," Nixiera whispered. "That your mother, Lady Alara, was his true mate. That he intended for you to inherit the Botolph territories and title when you came of age." The room tilted. Lupera gripped the edge of the bed to steady herself. "My mother killed her," Nixiera continued, her voice breaking. "Killed Lady Alara when you were 3 years old. Poisoned her during the winter fever outbreak, so it would look natural. Your father suspected, but he couldn't prove it. And then he died too." "How?" The word came out sharp as glass. Nixiera met her eyes, and in them Lupera saw raw, terrible truth. "The same way. Poison disguised as illness." The air left Lupera's lungs in a rush. "She's been suppressing your wolf since you were a child," Nixiera said. "Herbs in your food, in your tea. Enough to keep your power dormant, but not enough to kill you outright. Because she needed you alive, needed the heir visible but broken, so she could rule in your place." Lupera took the envelope with shaking hands, broke the seal. Inside were 3 letters in her father's handwriting, strong, familiar strokes she remembered from childhood. "My dearest Lupera, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are old enough to know the truth. You are my daughter, born of the sacred bond between myself and your mother, Ilara of the Moonborn line. You carry alpha blood purer than any in the Northern Territories, and it is my intention that you inherit all I have built. Do not let them convince you that you are less. Do not let them break what your mother and I created. You are meant to lead, little wolf. You are meant to run free. The letters blurred as tears filled Lupura's eyes. She read all three: her father's plans for her future, his suspicions about Shinori's, his desperate instructions for trusted allies who might protect her if he died. Allies who had clearly been eliminated or silenced. When she finally looked up, Nixiera had sunk into the chair, her face buried in her hands. "I'm sorry," her sister sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I should have been braver. Should have helped you. Should have." "Stop." Lupura's voice was raw but firm. Nixiera looked up, her face streaked with tears. Lupura stood, the letters clutched to her chest. She crossed the room slowly, every step deliberate, until she stood before the sister who had watched her suffer in silence. "You were her victim too," Lupura said quietly. "Weren't you?" Nixiera's breath hitched. She nodded just once. "What did she threaten you with?" "That I'd end up like you," Nixiera whispered. "That if I wasn't perfect, if I wasn't exactly what she wanted, she'd destroy me the way she destroyed you. I watched what she did to you, and I was so afraid, Lupura. I'm still afraid." Lupura looked at this broken, terrified girl who wore her sister's face, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. "We're both her prisoners," Lupura said softly. "We just had different cells." Nixiera's sob was answer enough. They stood there in the fading light, two daughters of the same father, raised under the same poisonous roof, finally seeing each other clearly. "I can't promise I forgive you," Lupura said. "Not yet. I don't deserve, but I won't carry her poison anymore." Lupura's eyes blazed gold for just a moment. "And neither will you." Before Nixiera could respond, the door opened. Mora entered without knocking, his silver eyes taking in the scene instantly, the letters in Lupura's hand, Nixiera's tears, the fragile tension between them. "You need to see this," he said to Lupura, his voice grim. "Shinori's is mobilizing. She sent riders to her allies." Lupura's spine straightened. "What kind of allies?" "The kind who don't ask questions when there's gold involved." Mora crossed to her, his presence immediately grounding. "She means to have you killed before the moon rises tomorrow. Before word of what happened tonight spreads too far." Fear spiked through Lupura's chest, but Mora's hand found hers, steady and sure. "She won't succeed," he said, his voice dropping to something fierce and protective. "I will burn this territory to ash before I let her touch you again." Lupura looked up at him, this powerful alpha who had seen her when she was invisible, who had claimed her when she was nothing. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Mora's silver eyes softened. His free hand rose to cup her face with a gentleness that made her chest ache. "Because the moment I caught your scent, my wolf knew," he said simply. "You're not just an alpha, Lupura. You're mine, and I protect what's mine." Behind them, Nixiera quietly stood. "I'll help," she said, her voice stronger now. "Whatever you need. I'll testify against her. I'll give you every piece of evidence I've hidden. Just please, let me help undo what I helped create." Mora glanced at her, assessing, then nodded once. "Then we move tonight," he said. "Before Shinori's can strike first." Lupura's hand tightened on the letters, her father's final gift, the proof of who she really was. The girl who had learned to disappear was done hiding. Chapter 7: The Reckoning. The council chamber of the Botalf estate had not been used since Lupura's father died. Now, in the gray light before dawn, it blazed with torches. Mora had summoned every alpha who'd attended the feast, along with the Northern Territory Council, 12 elder wolves whose authority superseded even the great houses. And at the center of it all stood Lupura. She wore a simple dress of deep gray, her dark hair unbound, her amber-green eyes clear and steady. No servant's uniform, no chains, no fear. Beside her stood Mora, a silent wall of strength. And on her other side, trembling but resolute, stood Nixiera. Across from them, Lady Shinori sat in her high-backed chair, her face a mask of calm control. But Lupura could see the tension in her jaw, the white-knuckle grip on the armrests. "This is highly irregular," Shinori said, her voice carrying its usual authority. "To convene a formal council without my consent in my own home. This is not your home, Mora interrupted quietly. It never was. The eldest council member, Lord Greymont, a wolf whose silver hair spoke of 7 decades of pack law, raised his hand for silence. Lord Mora has presented troubling allegations, Greymont said, his deep voice measured. Allegations that require examination. Lady Shinoris, you stand accused of conspiracy, murder, and the unlawful suppression of an alpha heir. How do you answer? Shinoris' laugh was brittle. With all due respect, Lord Greymont, these accusations stem from a hysterical girl with a history of delusions. Surely you cannot take seriously. I can take seriously the testimony of 12 witnesses who watched her display alpha dominance powerful enough to force submission from every wolf in this hall, Greymont cut in, including myself. A murmur ran through the chamber. Shinoris' mask slipped for just a moment. A parlor trick. A temporary surge brought on by contaminated wine or... I have the letters. Lupera's voice rang clear through the chamber. Every eye turned to her. She stepped forward, holding her father's letters like a shield, written by Lord Aldrich Botolph in his own hand, witnessed and sealed, declaring me his legitimate heir and expressing his suspicions regarding my mother's death. She handed the first letter to Lord Greymont, who broke the seal and read in silence. His expression grew darker with each line. Furthermore, Lupera continued, her voice growing stronger, I have testimony from my half-sister, Nixiera Botolph, who will attest to the systematic poisoning that suppressed my wolf for 19 years. Nixiera stepped forward, her face pale but determined. It's true, she said, her voice shaking. I watched my mother add wolfsbane tincture and suppression herbs to Lupera's food from the time she was a child. I have the bottles hidden in my mother's private chambers. I can show you. She's lying, Shinoris hissed, rising from her chair. My own daughter, turned against me by this pretender's manipulation. I also have testimony from the household staff, Mora added calmly. 3 servants willing to confirm the abuse. The chains, the isolation, the public humiliation. He produced a document with multiple signatures. And I have a report from my personal healer who examined Lupera yesterday. The levels of wolfsbane and silver contamination in her blood are consistent with 19 years of systematic poisoning. Shinoris' face had gone white. This is conspiracy. You've orchestrated this because you want the Botolph territories for yourself. I want nothing but justice, Mora said, his silver eyes hard as steel. And the safety of my mate. The word echoed through the chamber like a bell. Mate? Lupera's breath caught. Beside her, she felt Mora's hand find hers, warm, certain, claiming. Your mate! Greymont's eyebrows rose. You've claimed her. The moment I caught her scent, my wolf knew, Mora said simply. Everything I've done since has been to protect what's mine. Shinoris let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Of course. The great Alpha King, swayed by a pretty face and a sad story. You know nothing about her. About what she really is. I know she's the rightful heir to House Botolph, Mora said. I know she carries alpha blood purer than anyone in this room. And I know you've spent 19 years trying to destroy her because you couldn't bear the thought of losing power to the daughter of the woman you murdered. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Shinoris' control finally shattered. Ilera was weak. She didn't deserve Aldrich, didn't deserve his house, this title. I gave him strength. I gave him a proper daughter, and he still pined for that pathetic. You've confessed, Greymont said quietly. Shinoris froze. The council chamber was absolutely silent. You've confessed to murder, Greymont continued, his voice heavy with authority. Before the council, before witnesses, you've admitted to killing Lady Ilera. Do you also confess to Lord Aldrich's death? Shinoris' throat worked. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for escape, for allies. She found none. Every alpha watched her with expressions ranging from disgust to pity. He was going to expose me, she whispered finally. Going to take everything away. Give it all to her. Her wild eyes fixed on Lupera. A child. A half-formed little wolf who couldn't even shift properly. He was going to throw away everything I'd built for her. Enough. Lupera's voice cut through the confession like a blade. She stepped forward, and her aura flooded the room. Not violent, not aggressive but undeniable. The power of an alpha claiming her rightful place. "You stole my childhood," Lupra said, her voice steady despite the tears burning her eyes. "You murdered my parents. You tried to convince me I was nothing, that I deserved the chains and the silence and the shame." She stood directly in front of Shinori's now, meeting the woman's eyes without flinching. "But you failed," Lupra said softly, "because I'm still here, still standing, and I am everything you feared I would be." Her eyes blazed gold. "I am Lupra Alara Botalf, daughter of Aldrich and Alara, heir to the northern Botalf territories. And I claim what is mine." The declaration rang through the chamber like a coronation. Greymont rose from his seat, and one by one, the other council members followed. "The council recognizes Lupra Botalf as the rightful heir," Greymont announced. "Lady Shinoris, you are stripped of all titles and authority. You will be taken into custody pending trial for the murders of Lady Alara and Lord Aldrich Botalf." 2 guards stepped forward. Shinoris didn't fight as they took her arms. She simply stared at Lupra with an expression of such pure hatred that several alphas shifted uncomfortably. "You think you've won," Shinori said softly. "But you're still that frightened little girl in chains. You'll never be strong enough to hold this territory. Never be worthy of." "That's enough." Mora's command silenced her instantly. He moved to Lupra's side, his hand settling on the small of her back. "Take her away." As the guards led Shinoris from the chamber, Lupra felt something inside her chest crack open, not breaking but releasing. 19 years of poison, of lies, of learned helplessness. Gone. Greymont approached and bowed, actually bowed, before her. "Lady Lupra," he said formally, "on behalf of the Northern Territory Council, I apologize for our blindness. We should have investigated when Lord Aldrich died. We should have protected you." Lupra's throat tightened. "You didn't know. We should have." He straightened, his ancient eyes kind. "But we know now, and we stand ready to support your claim." One by one, the alphas in the chamber approached and offered their submission, not in defeat, but in recognition, in acceptance of her authority. By the time the last wolf had bowed, the sun had risen, spilling golden light through the chamber windows. Lupra stood in that light and finally let herself believe. She was free. Chapter 8. The Bond. The Botalf estate looked different in daylight. Lupra walked through halls that had once felt like a prison and saw them with new eyes. These were her halls now, her home. The servants who had once ignored her now bowed as she passed, their expressions a mixture of shame and hope. She'd spent the morning in meetings with the territory stewards, learning the extent of what she'd inherited. Lands, alliances, trade agreements, it was overwhelming. But Mora had stayed at her side through all of it, a steady presence that kept her grounded. Now, as afternoon light slanted through the windows of her father's study, she stood alone for the first time since the council's judgment. She moved to the portrait hanging above the fireplace. Her father and mother, painted in the early years of their bond. Aldrich stood tall and proud, his dark hair matching Lupra's own. And beside him, Alara, delicate and beautiful, with amber-green eyes ringed in gold. Lupra's eyes. "You look like her." She turned to find Mora in the doorway, watching her with those devastating silver eyes. "I never knew," she said softly. "Shinoris destroyed all the portraits, all the records. I didn't even know what my mother looked like until." Her voice broke. Mora crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. She went without resistance, burying her face against his chest as 19 years of grief finally broke free. He held her while she cried, didn't tell her to stop, didn't offer empty platitudes. Just held her, solid and unbreakable, until the storm passed. When she finally pulled back, his shirt was soaked with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be." His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing away the remaining tears. "You've earned the right to grieve." "I don't even know where to start," Lupra admitted. "There's so much I don't know about being an alpha, about leading a territory. What if I fail? What if Shinoris was right and I'm not strong enough?" "Stop." Mora's voice was gentle but firm. "Shinoris was never right about you. Not once." He guided her to sit in one of the leather chairs by the fire, then knelt before her, so they were eye level. "Listen to me," he said. You survived 19 years of systematic abuse and poisoning. You survived being told you were nothing, being treated as less than nothing, and you still had the strength to shift, to run to hope. That's not weakness, Lupra. That's the most powerful thing I've ever seen. But I don't know how to lead, she protested. Then you'll learn. I'll teach you. His hands covered hers. That's what mates do. There it was again. That word that made her heart stutter. You keep calling me that, Lupra said quietly. Mate! But we barely know each other. How can you be sure? Because my wolf recognized yours the moment I arrived, Mora said simply. Because every instinct I possess screams at me to protect you, to claim you, to stand at your side until my last breath. Because when I look at you, I see my future. His silver eyes held hers, intense and unwavering. But I won't force this on you, he continued. The bond is there, you feel it too, I know you do. But if you need time, if you want to learn who you are before you bind yourself to anyone, I'll wait. I'll wait 100 years if that's what you need. Lupra's breath caught. She could feel it, the bond he described. A golden thread connecting her heart to his, growing stronger with every moment they spent together. What if I'm broken? She whispered. What if Shinori's damaged me too much to ever be a proper mate? Mora's expression softened into something so tender it made her chest ache. You're not broken, he said. You're healing. There's a difference. He rose and pulled her to her feet, then led her to the window. Outside, the forest stretched wild and infinite beneath the afternoon sun. Your wolf was caged for 19 years, Mora said. Poisoned, suppressed. But she never died, Lupra. She waited, and now she's free. As if in response to his words, Lupra felt her wolf stir, stronger now, no longer the uncertain thing that had trembled in the woods. The suppressants were leaving her system. Her true nature was emerging. I can feel her, Lupra breathed. She's bigger than before. She always was, Mora said. You just couldn't access your full power. But now! He turned to her, and his smile was fierce with pride. Now you're going to run. They shifted in the courtyard. The household staff had gathered to watch, not with the cruel curiosity of those witnessing punishment, but with genuine awe. Lupra closed her eyes and reached for her wolf. This time, there was no pain, no struggle, just a smooth, natural transition as her body reformed. When she opened her eyes, she stood on 4 paws instead of 2. Gasps echoed around the courtyard, because Lupra's wolf was magnificent. Not small and uncertain, but powerful and graceful, larger than any female wolf had a right to be. Her coat was pure silver, shimmering in the sunlight like starlight given form. Her eyes blazed with amber gold fire. This was what she had always been beneath the poison. This was her truth. Beside her, Mora shifted into his wolf, massive, midnight black, with those same silver eyes. He was larger, as alpha kings tended to be, but Lupra no longer felt diminished by comparison. She felt matched. Mora's wolf touched his nose to hers, a gesture of greeting, of recognition. Run with me, his wolf's energy seemed to say. Lupra's wolf answered with a joyous howl. They ran. Through the gates, into the forest, across snow and stone and frozen streams. Lupra's paws barely touched the ground. Her muscles moved with a grace she'd never known, power flooding through her with every stride. This was what she'd been denied her entire life. This freedom, this wildness. Mora ran beside her, not leading, not following, but matching her stride for stride. They moved through the forest like twin shadows, their wolves in perfect synchronization. When they finally stopped, they stood on a cliff overlooking the valley. The Botalf estate spread below them, and beyond it, the territories that were now Lupra's to protect. Mora shifted back to human form. After a moment's hesitation, Lupra did the same. They stood in the cold air, and neither seemed to notice the winter wind. That, Lupra said breathlessly, that was who you really are, Mora finished. He stepped closer, and in the fading light, his expression was open in a way she'd never seen. I meant what I said, he told her. I'll wait as long as you need, but I need you to know, you're not alone anymore, Lupra. You have a territory, allies, a sister who's trying to make amends. And you have me. His hand rose to cup her face. You'll always have me. Lupra looked up at this powerful alpha who had seen her when she was invisible, who had fought for her when she couldn't fight for herself. The bond between them glowed like a living thing, warm and golden and right. "I don't want to wait," she whispered. Mora's eyes widened. "Lupra, I don't want to wait," she repeated, stronger now. "I've spent 19 years in a cage. I'm done waiting. I'm done being afraid." She took his hand and pressed it to her heart, where the bond blazed brightest. "I choose this. I choose you. I choose us." Mora's breath caught, and then he smiled, a real smile, full of fierce joy and something that looked like wonder. "Then I am yours," he said softly. "As you are mine." He leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle at first, a question, an offering. But when Lupra's arms wrapped around his neck, when she rose on her toes to meet him fully, the kiss deepened into something claiming. Something that sealed the bond between them with a finality that could not be undone. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lupra felt different. "Whole. We should get back," Mora murmured against her hair. "Before someone sends a search party." "Let them wait," Lupra said, surprising herself with the boldness. Mora laughed, a sound of pure delight, and pulled her closer. They stood on the cliff as the sun set, two wolves who had found each other against all odds, and watched the world transform into gold and shadow. Tomorrow, there would be work to do. A territory to run, justice to oversee, a future to build. But tonight, they simply held each other and let the bond settle into place. Finally, Lupra thought as Mora's arms tightened around her. "Finally, I'm home." Chapter 9. The Alpha Rising. 3 months later, the great hall of the Botalf estate, Lupra still struggled to think of it as her estate, had been transformed once again. But this time, not for deception or cruelty. This time, for celebration. The spring gathering brought together every major Alpha family in the Northern Territories, but unlike the disastrous feast 3 months ago, tonight the hall rang with genuine warmth. Laughter echoed off the stone walls. Wine flowed freely, and at the center of it all, Lupra stood in a gown of deep silver, accepting congratulations from wolves who 3 months ago hadn't known she existed. "Lady Lupra!" Lord Greymont approached with a younger wolf at his side. "May I introduce my grandson, Kieran? He's recently taken over the Eastern Valley Territory." Lupra extended her hand, and Kieran bowed over it respectfully. "An honor, my lady. Your work to reform the territory labor laws has been impressive." "Thank you," Lupra said warmly. "Though I can't take all the credit. My advisors have been invaluable." She glanced across the hall to where Nixiera stood in conversation with several other young nobles. Her half-sister had proven herself over the past 3 months, testifying against Shinoris at the trial, helping Lupra navigate the complex politics of the territory, slowly earning back trust through consistent action rather than empty words. They weren't close. Not yet. The wounds ran too deep for easy forgiveness. But they were trying, and that, Lupra had learned, was enough. "Your mother would be proud," Greymont said softly, following her gaze to Alara's portrait, which now hung restored in a place of honor. "As would your father." Lupra's throat tightened. "I hope so." "No hope required," a familiar voice said from behind her. She turned to find Mora approaching, devastating in black formal wear, his silver eyes warm as they met hers. The bond between them hummed with contentment, stronger now than it had been even on the cliff 3 months ago. "Gentlemen," Mora said, nodding to Greymont and Kieran. "Mind if I steal my mate for a dance?" "By all means," Greymont said with a knowing smile. Mora offered his hand, and Lupra took it without hesitation. He led her onto the dance floor as the musicians began a waltz. "Rescuing me?" Lupra murmured as they began to move. "Always," Mora replied, his hand settling at her waist. "Though you looked like you were handling yourself perfectly well." "I'm learning." She smiled up at him. "I actually enjoyed that conversation." "Good, because there are about 30 more alphas waiting to meet you." His expression turned serious. "Are you sure you're ready for the announcement tonight?" Lupra took a breath. Tonight, before all the assembled territories, she would formally claim her title as Alpha of the Northern Botalf Territories. It was one thing to have the Council's recognition, another entirely to stand before her peers and declare herself their equal. The old Lupra, the girl who had learned to be invisible, whispered that she wasn't ready, would never be ready. But that girl was gone. "I'm sure," she said firmly. Mora's pride blazed through their bond. "Then they'll see what I've known since the moment I arrived. That you're the most powerful wolf in this room." "Except you," Lupra pointed out. "No." Mora's voice dropped to something intimate, meant only for her. "Not except me. With me. We're equals, Lupra. In power, in authority, in everything." The song ended, and Mora led her to the raised platform at the head of the hall. Lord Greymont was already there, the ceremonial alpha crown resting on a velvet cushion beside him. The room gradually quieted as wolves noticed what was happening. When silence finally fell, Greymont spoke. "3 months ago, this hall witnessed a revelation," he began, his voice carrying through the space. "We learned that the Botolph bloodline had survived, that an heir lived, despite years of suppression and abuse." Murmurs of assent rippled through the crowd. "Tonight," Greymont continued, "we formalize what our wolves have already recognized." Lupra Lara Botolph stepped forward. Lupra moved to stand before him, her heart pounding but her head high. "Do you accept the responsibility of the northern Botolph territories?" Greymont asked. "To lead with wisdom, to protect with strength, to serve with honor." "I do," Lupra said clearly. "Do you swear to uphold the ancient laws of our kind, to defend the weak, to challenge injustice, to be a voice for those who cannot speak?" Lupra thought of the servants who had watched her suffer in silence, of Nyxera, trapped by fear, of every wolf who had ever been made to feel small. "I do," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Greymont lifted the crown, a simple circlet of silver and moonstone that had belonged to her mother. "Then, by the authority of the Northern Territory Council, I recognize you as Alpha." He placed the crown on her head. "Rise, Lady Lupra, and take your place among us." The hall erupted, not in polite applause, but in howls, the traditional wolf response to a new Alpha's rising. The sound filled the hall, filled the night, a chorus of recognition and acceptance. Lupra's wolf surged in response, her aura flooding the room with golden power. Not to dominate, but to answer, to claim her place. She was not the frightened girl in chains anymore. She was Alpha. Mora was the first to approach, and he knelt before her, an Alpha king kneeling to his mate, showing the assembled territories exactly where his loyalty lay. "My Lady Alpha," he said formally, though his eyes danced with warmth. The Mora territories pledged their alliance and support. "I accept," Lupra said, her voice steady, "and offer the same in return." He rose and took his place at her side, and one by one, the other Alphas approached to offer their recognition. By the time the last wolf had sworn their respect, Lupra felt something settle into place inside her chest. Not just acceptance, but belonging. She belonged here, had always belonged here. Later, when the feast had ended and the guests had retired, Lupra stood on the balcony outside her chambers and looked out over her territory. The forest stretched wild and infinite beneath the stars. Somewhere in those trees, wolves ran free. Her wolves, her responsibility, her pack. "Can't sleep!" Mora emerged from their shared chambers, crossing to wrap his arms around her from behind. "Too much to think about," Lupra admitted, leaning back against his chest. "Doubts?" "No." She turned in his arms to face him. "The opposite. I keep waiting for it to feel overwhelming, but it doesn't. It feels right." "That's because it is right," Mora said. "You were meant for this, Lupra. Meant to lead. Meant to be exactly who you are." She reached up to touch his face, still marveling that she was allowed this. That this powerful, devastating Alpha was hers. "What about you?" she asked. "The great Alpha King, bound to a mate who's still learning how to use her power. Do you have doubts?" Mora's laugh was soft and sure. "Not a single one." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips, gentle and claiming at once. "You're my mate," he murmured against her mouth. "My equal. My future. I've never been more certain of anything." Lupra's eyes burned with happy tears. 3 months ago, she had been alone, broken, convinced she was nothing. Now she stood in the arms of the wolf who had seen her when she was invisible, crowned as Alpha, with a territory to protect and a future that stretched bright and infinite before her. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For seeing me, when I couldn't see myself. Mora's arms tightened around her. Always, he promised. I will always see you. They stood together on the balcony as the moon rose full and bright overhead. And somewhere in the forest below, wolves howled in greeting, a song of recognition, of celebration, of freedom. Lupra closed her eyes and let her wolf add her voice to the chorus. Not small, not uncertain, not suppressed, wild, powerful, free. The girl who had learned to disappear had become the alpha who could not be ignored. And as the night wind carried their howls across the territories, Lupra Alara Botalf, daughter of Aldrich and Alara, mate to the Alpha King, leader of the northern Botalf territories, finally came home to herself. The nursery in the East Wing had been Lupra's idea. We should have a place for visiting families, she told Mora 6 months into her rule. Somewhere children are welcome, where they can be children without worrying about formal protocols. Now that room echoed with laughter as 3 young pups, children of visiting alphas, tumbled across the carpet in their wolf forms, while their parents conducted business with Lupra in the study next door. Nixiera supervised the chaos with surprising patience, her own wolf settled and content in a way it never had been under Shinori's rule. In the study, Lupra reviewed trade agreements with the Eastern Valley Pack, her confidence in such matters now second nature. Mora sat at her side, not leading, but supporting, offering input when asked and remaining silent when not needed. This was their rhythm, their balance. If we adjust the timber quotas here, Lupra said, pointing to a clause in the contract, we can ensure sustainable harvesting while increasing revenue for both territories. The Eastern Valley Alpha, Kieran, who had become a valued ally, nodded in approval. Agreed. Your innovations continue to impress, Lady Lupra. Please, Lupra said with a smile. Just Lupra. After the contracts were signed, and Kieran had departed to collect his children, Mora turned to her with a familiar warmth in his silver eyes. You're extraordinary, you know that. Lupra laughed. I'm doing my job. You're doing more than that. He pulled her close. You're changing how these territories operate, making them better, fairer. We're making them better, Lupra corrected. I couldn't do this without you. Equals, Mora said softly, echoing their vow. Always. A knock at the door interrupted them. Nixiera poked her head in, her expression apologetic. Sorry to interrupt, but the pups have finally worn themselves out. Their parents are ready to depart. She paused, then added quietly, and I wanted to ask, next month's memorial for Father. Would you want me to speak, or would you prefer? We'll speak together, Lupra said gently. If you're comfortable with that. Nixiera's expression brightened with relief and gratitude. I'd like that. After she left, Lupra returned to the window, looking out over the territory that had once been her prison and was now her home. Do you ever regret it? She asked Mora. Binding yourself to me? Taking on my territory's problems as your own? Mora came to stand beside her, following her gaze out over the forest. Every day, he said seriously. Lupra's heart stuttered. I regret that I didn't find you sooner, Mora continued, his hand finding hers. That you had to suffer for 19 years before I could protect you. That's my only regret. He turned her to face him, his expression fierce with love. Binding myself to you was the easiest decision I've ever made. You are my mate, my equal, my home. And I would choose you again every single day for the rest of my life. Lupra's eyes burned with happy tears. She rose on her toes to kiss him, pouring everything she felt into that simple touch. When they finally broke apart, both smiling, Lupra rested her forehead against his. I love you, she whispered. I love you, Mora returned. My wild, powerful, extraordinary mate. Outside, the forest stretched infinite and free beneath the afternoon sun. And in the heart of the Botalf estate, 2 wolves stood together, healed, whole, and home at last.